Bill Meyer from the Michigan Peace Council, chair of the organization. We're part of the U.S. Peace Council, which has chapters across the country. We just restarted a couple years ago, and some of you out there are members. And I hope the rest of you consider being a member of the Michigan Peace Council, a truly anti-war, anti-imperialist organizations in the left. And we've done good work over long years. It's one of the largest organizations, peace organizations in the world, connected with the World Peace Council. And we have a website and a Facebook page, which is not being kept up very well, but if any of you would like to help us with that, we'd love it. Okay, so before we start the program, there's something very, very important that I'd like to share with you that I didn't know about till just now, just recently. And some of us here are older comrades and been in the struggle a long time. And we just heard of the news of a fallen comrade, someone we loved that worked with us in many things. And I asked Steve Nofsky to come up and please say a few words about our dear friend Pat. Let's welcome Steve.
Let people know, 2 days ago, Pat Fry passed away. Now, Pat was a long-time Detroit resident. She grew up in Detroit. Her first influences was the church she went to, where Violetta Liuzzo went to. And she was the woman that went from Detroit down south and worked on the Civil Rights Movement. And she was killed, murdered in fact, by the Ku Klux Klan. And that whole thing had a big effect on Pat. So her whole life was dedicated towards making the world a better place. Her connection, she was an activist at Eastern Michigan University, but she was part of the Venceremos Brigade that went down to Cuba to help cut sugarcane and work to help build socialism back in the 70s. And I don't know if it continues today, but she was a big part of that. A tremendous influence on her. So she was a strong part of the hands-off Cuba committee, and very, very active in the Cuban solidarity work. At one point, she participated in a number of demonstrations and struggles around that, where she ran into members of the Communist Party, and she joined the Communist Party, and later became the People's World editor. She was a labor reporter for the People's World. She was an outstanding reporter. She covered the auto industry like nobody had before, since going back 30, 40 years. And she's a tremendous reporter, tremendous activist. She died from a brain tumor. I saw her about 4 months ago, and physically she had kind of really, gotten bad, but her mental capacities and everything else were still very solid, very strong. And she left the party in '91, but never was anti-party. We always worked together. She was just a solid, solid person. And I think it's important to remember also that she was part of the Michigan Peace Council, and she was part of the group that put together the tribute to Paul Robeson, which was a tremendous, tremendous event in the city. So just want to take a moment of silence, remembering Pat Fry and all the work she did, and she will be missed. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Yes, Pat was an exemplary comrade. I remember working in this room with her on several projects when Chris Honey toured the U.S. right here on this stage at this point. She helped bring him through Detroit. Many things. And the Detroit tribute to Paul Robeson, I was the producer of that. She was a writer with it. A strong, great activist. So we all are coming up in her place, and some of us are a lot younger and going to fill in the void. Some of us are up there with her in age, and we just keep on the struggle. So we're very excited to see a lot of young people getting involved in this issue. This is going to be a very informal discussion. Let me just, we've done this is a fifth one now. We've done 4 before, and the whole purpose of this is to bring organizations and people together to learn about how they work around the issue of U.S. imperialism and struggle against it. We don't all agree on everything. We'll say that up front here, but we do agree that the U.S. empire has done tremendous damage. So U.S. imperialism has an economic grip on the world's economy, with the U.S. dollar now as a long-time federal reserve currency. With many countries trapped in this endless state of debt to the most powerful controlling empire in recorded history. It has military hegemony in the world, with over 800 military bases, encircling countries that dare not to follow our dictates of the Western alliance. And it has control over the media and information, culture, giving a new meaning to the phrase that history is written, controlled, and defined by the victor. But all this is changing, and it's changing faster than we expected. A new multipolar world is being discussed, being developed. It's emerging in countries that are freeing themselves from the empire, from the grip of the unipolar power of the U.S. that expects the whole world to follow its dictates. Countries are freeing themselves from control of the U.S. dollar, as de-dollarization now is progressing at a faster speed than anyone had expected. People around the world are learning quickly also about how the U.S. owns the internet and controls it, enforces its culture with corporate profit-driven Hollywood movies and music and art, quite often dominating the countries that they're in. So people who live in the United States of America, which has been arrogantly termed America, as to exclude all the other parts of America who live in the entire Western Hemisphere. I mean, we're part of a vast group of Americans, not just us in the U.S. They're starting to see the truth about the destructive nature and the force of our country in the world, which has been responsible for probably over 100 million deaths through wars, endless wars. We've been in war constantly. And we either started them or we somehow inspired them. All for the sake of money and power, benefiting primarily the rich capitalist elites with the military-industrial economic complex. So, the Michigan Peace Council has offered these series of discussions about uniting around this struggle. This is the fifth in the series, bringing together like-minded friends. We're going to focus on imperialism in this discussion, but we also want to learn about the groups. Some may not know of some of these groups up here, so we're going to do a little different format than we've done in the other four. We have basically three questions. The first one is going to be to learn about each group and the people. And the second question is going to be to talk about terminology, imperialism, how do you define it? The left, what is the left? Those kind of questions. And the third one is going to be, how do you see we can work together? How can we expand our network to make a bigger, more powerful effect against the empire? Those are three basic questions, and each one's going to be able to speak in, it'll be like, sort of like an interview, conversation format. And so I was going to have a hat, draw out of the hat, pick the first number, but I just try to make it democratic as much as I can. We'll just start at this end. Okay, we'll start at this end. I have short information about them that I'm going to say, and then they're going to give more information as they talk. This is Jim RINE. Jim RINE has been well known now here around about working with the Veterans for Peace. He's also with the Climate Crisis and Militarism Project. He's a member of the Chapter 074. It's so important, I'll have to ask you that. 074 of Veterans for Peace. He's an adjunct professor at White State University. He returned to the area here about 7 years ago. Lives in Grossmoor Woods. He's a research geologist. He's retired, and he's very active around moving money from the military. And I'd like to just introduce him, give him a round of applause, and let him say a little further about his group. Jim RINE.
Thank you. Well, yes, okay. So I'm originally from Detroit. I sort of grew up just south of 8 Mile Road, and after 50 years, when I returned 7 years ago, I moved due east so I could put my kayak in the water in Lake St. Clair. Plus, it's a walkable place. Also moved up here because as a research geologist, I know about climate change, and I figured this is the best place that I could retire, and by the time I moved on, my house would be a lot more valuable than it is now, and I could pass on the benefits to my grandson. Now, I've been a member of Veterans for Peace. I really didn't get woke. I mean, I'm a veteran. I actually went to university on a ROTC scholarship, so I had no debt. I paid my debt beforehand. I was lucky enough to go to Germany instead of Vietnam, but I saw enough carnage and waste in Germany to be morally injured. I think most of the members of Veterans for Peace are morally injured in some way or another. Now, if you don't know about moral injury, first is PTSD. PTSD, you've experienced a traumatic event. Moral injury is you've seen it, or you've been involved in a moral injury, you've seen something that was wrong and that it affected you. I think there was an article about the nurses nowadays being morally injured from dealing with patients, and they don't have enough nurses. So anybody can get moral injury. We have veterans. We also have associate members in Veterans for Peace. We have 130 chapters around the country, and also like in the UK and in Vietnam and places like that. About between 3,000 to 4,000 members. A particular group that I'm working with, Climate Crisis and Militarism Project, I think is especially suited for me because I've done a lot of work in climate, and then also being a veteran, I can address those two connections with some authority. And I gave a poster, which is over here to my right, your left, about the intersection of militarism and environmental justice, how negatively impacts environmental justice. And there was a gentleman there that came up to me. I'm not sure where he was from. I think it might have been Nigeria or someplace based on his accent. But he said he really agreed with what I had to say, and he really thought it was a good thing about linking militarism and climate change, but that he felt he could not do that because he didn't know how to get a knock at the door. And I essentially said, well, as a veteran and from a privileged class, I felt that I could do that a lot better, and that's what my role is and what I'm working on. Now, as far as the climate crisis, I joined Veterans for Peace when I became woke. When W invaded Iraq. I was in Houston at the time, where I moved down to Houston, and I participated in organizing demonstrations and memorials inside the city. I also was at Camp Casey with Cindy Sheehan a number of times, so I was active in doing that. But after Obama took over and the climate was getting much, much worse, I gravitated more to climate change. And again, I was very happy to find this particular group that started about 2 years ago. And it's folks mostly on the West Coast who figured that there's a lot of things going wrong, but if we don't get climate change corrected, nothing's going to work out. So we need to concentrate on that, and that's what we're mostly giving talks, very similar to what this poster is, except in a PowerPoint. We give talks mostly via Zoom. There's a bunch of demonstrations, not a bunch compared to a lot of other folks in this room, but a couple got arrested a couple times last year, getting more into the streets. And that's the kind of thing we're doing, trying to get the word out. The intersection of climate and militarism, there's a lot more environmentalists than there are in the peace movement. We get more environmentalists involved in this, and we have bigger numbers. I'll just stop there.
So, well, let me ask you a couple questions. I'm more curious about the background of Veterans for Peace. Did that start during the Vietnam War, right?
No, it actually started with all the stuff that was going on in Central America. It didn't start until about 85. The first chapter was in Maine. There were a lot of folks that went down to Central America trying to protest and be active against that.
But there were a lot of Vietnam vets who...
Yes, it's mostly a lot of folks that are coming from Vietnam Veterans Against the War are a lot of folks. That's why a lot of the folks are, has color of hair like I am, and they're dying out fast.
So that was the first one, Vietnam Vets Against the War.
Correct.
It started during the war.
Vietnam Vets Against the War, yes, well, John Kerry was one of those founding members.
Does it still exist?
There is, unfortunately, well, yes, not unfortunately, but there is still a Vietnam Veterans Against the War, just like there is an Iraq Veterans Against the War. Unfortunately, like the environmental movement, there's all these different groups, and they're all semi-shrinking.
So are there other veterans groups that are maybe politically different than yours, or for some reason different, or are you the main organization?
maybe numerically we're the main organization, but I mean, I really don't have the background to say who is the biggest. So
Okay, or different, in a different position about war.
we're all, I mean, we're all opposed to war for the most part. I mean, this thing that's going on in Ukraine has sort of put a slight division within Veterans for Peace, but a group there was slapped down. We are opposed to all wars, and we want this one to stop. So.
Okay. All right, well, that's a good start. Thank you very much, Jim. And we have more questions for you. How about Miriam? Miriam is from the Palestinian youth movement.
Iraqi.
From the Palestinian youth movement. She's Iraqi. And she's, the organization formed around 2017, I understand. She lived in Windsor originally, and now lives in Ypsilanti. And she's, I don't know what your title is in the PYM, but give us more information about the group and what you do.
Yeah, I joined the PYM in 2021, and the Detroit chapter started in 2017, but the whole organization started in around 2010 in the Bay Area. And so the Palestinian Youth Movement is a national liberation organization. We are a movement of Palestinian and Arab youth who are living in exile as a result of ongoing Zionist colonization and occupation. We organize for the liberation of Palestine, the right of return for all refugees, and the end of Zionism, dismantling Zionism. Some of our principles include, we believe that youth are at the forefront of the struggle. Our condition as Palestinians is one of a foreign settler colonial regime whose existence is premised on the ethnic cleansing of our homeland and the dilution of our national belonging and resistance. We stand against all forms of colonialism, traditional and neo-colonial, for our struggle and the struggle of all oppressed people. And we believe in the right to resist by any means, whether Palestinian or any oppressed people. And we also believe that Zionism affects all Arabs. The Palestinian struggle is undeniably rooted in a broader Arab struggle. So we have about 20 chapters around North America and Europe. We did start in the Bay Area. Detroit started in 2017. And we have about 13 in North America, and we're expanding in Britain, Italy, and Sweden currently. Some of our work includes anti-militarism, anti-surveillance, policing, the prisoner movement and the abolitionist movement, land-based struggles, and confronting Zionism in all the ways that it shows up in our communities. In terms of how PYM positions itself in the left relative to other groups, we're a national liberation organization. As we approach Palestinian liberation, we weaken the empire, and that brings all oppressed people closer to liberation as well. So we focus on building consciousness in the Arab community. We fight together with other national liberation organizations, but we also fight the same fight against police violence, racism, surveillance, eviction, poverty, because these forms of violence are affecting us all, and we're together in the fight.
So how do you deal with the BDS campaign, for example?
Yeah, BDS is one kind of tactic. We're very much involved in that. Boycott, divest, and sanctions is a way to remove funneling funding into destroying homes, taking over communities and neighborhoods and villages in Palestine, whether it's through inviting settlers to take over those lands and build homes over them, or imposing military zones, any type of violence in the homeland. So BDS kind of breaks the channels to funding those projects from within the U.S., from within anywhere outside of Palestine or even in Palestine. So that is one method.
I heard yesterday from someone that I think 13 or 20 states of the U.S. have outlawed BDS campaigns and charging people with crimes if they support it. What do you know about that?
Yeah, so, I mean, the U.S. and the Zionist state, like, they punish any sort of, resistance, no matter how small we think it is. It's obviously, within the U.S. Constitution, and its own, it's a contradiction of its own existence, right? Because of free speech and everything, we're supposed to be able to spend our money and say whatever we feel, free speech. It's being punished, and we see that not just in BDS, but even student movements around the U.S. For Palestine, students either being not allowed to graduate, kicked off of their campuses, or just silenced in other ways. There's been so many campuses where a majority of 90-something% of a student body votes in favor of a BDS resolution or a boycott resolution, and then it's shut down by the administration, without due process. So there's a lot of wins, but then there's a lot of just suppression.
So your local chapter, is it associated with a college, or are you on campus anywhere?
We don't primarily organize on campuses, no. We're a youth movement, so we organize in our communities, but we do, the student movement is extremely crucial to Palestinian liberation. It's linked to student resistance in Palestine, which students and prisoners in Palestine are at the forefront of social change. And we really honor that. Some of the most radical work happens out of student organizing. So, we model ourselves after that, and we try to maintain that connection.
All right, so I didn't get to ask Jim this, but the answer is probably who. You have to be a veteran to be a member of your group. You don't have to answer this. I'm still with him. I'm just saying, your group obviously have to be a veteran.
No.
Oh, you don't? Okay, then answer that.
You can be an associate. I mean, anybody that sympathizes with our goals, peace, and nonviolent protests, things like that, not the use of violence. Like I said, anybody with moral injury, whether you get it in the newspaper or you have a relative. I mean, if you're in a military family, you are a veteran. So, or if you know people that are affected by wars, and they can be voting for things in Veterans for Peace now. So yes, you can. You don't have to be a veteran.
Okay, thanks. And Miriam, I assume you don't have to be Palestinian to be in the Palestinian youth movement, or do you have to be young?
There's an age range. Technically, it's not so strict, but our membership are Arab, Palestinian and Arab. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Let's give Miriam a All right, going to move over this side here. I just met Jackson a while back and at some rallies and stuff. He's very active, and learned about his group, which I've been active for many years, and I don't know much about your group, but also this is our chance to finally learn more. He's with the Freedom Road Socialist organization. I guess this is the only political group we have up here. He's working now with the SDS campaign at Oakland Community College. He was formerly with the CWL, Communist Workers League, in 2018, Workers' World Breakoff. And he's going to be moving to Detroit soon. He's active around other issues, housing and water issues, and we welcome you to be here with us tonight. And he's going to talk about his group. So let's welcome Jackson. So tell us about your group. How did it start? What is it?
Yeah, so Freedom Road Socialist Organization started in 1985 as a merger of the Revolutionary Workers Headquarters, which was original SDS kind of going from student work into broader Marxist work based out of Boston. And then you had the Proletarian Unity League, which was, it's my apologies, misworded myself. The Proletarian Unity League were SDSers. The Revolutionary Workers' Headquarters were a split off of the Revolutionary Communist Party after the Revolutionary Communist Party took what was believed an ultra-leftist line of opposing Deng Xiaoping and opposing, you know, the post-Mao leaders of China, and took a pro-Chinese position. You later saw groups like the Organization for Marxist Unity, or for Revolutionary Unity, the Amilcar Cabral, and the Paul Robeson Collective, and this is all throughout the course of the 80s. And then in 1996, there's a group known as the Socialist Organizing Network, which merges into Freedom Road, that were made up of national liberation groups, such as Chicano Work and the August 26 movement, and other Chinese groups based out of the Bay. So overall, it was a merging of a lot of different national liberation organizations and different, you know, Marxist currents throughout the 60s and the 70s. This affects, you know, how we view organizing today. Like, we believe our most, you know, strategic way to win is that we believe in the united front against monopoly capitalism with the strategic alliance of the multinational working class and oppressed nationality movements at its core. So,
Okay, that's a good start. So, when I was your age, a long time ago, on campus at Wayne State, there were a lot of groups, a lot of political groups. And I floated between all of them trying to find out what the difference was and what the ones that I eventually settled 20 years later on certain ones, but I was always curious about, you know, parties are based on the conditions of the country, the class struggle, the whole thing, and affinity towards Soviet Union or China or Albania or whatever other groups, and they're all based on theories that developed from there. So we're going to talk about this when we come to the terminology in a second question. Like, what is the left? What is revolutionary? What is a national revolutionary group? So your group, Freedom Road, when did it start? I mean, you just told us where it broke away on that.
1985.
1985.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I should also add the note, because you said party. We don't believe we are a party. We don't believe there is a party by Lenin's definition in America, because, you know, a party of a new type as defined by Lenin and Stalin means the whole of the masses are behind you. And we don't believe that any organization in America at the current point fits that definition. So hence the term, like, we define ourselves as a Marxist organization. We don't use the term party.
Okay, why did you use the word socialist as opposed to communist?
Well, I believe the main idea of that is the fact that right now we're trying to organize revolution to take on a socialist project. I think that is probably the biggest part of it, is simply, you know, our goal is socialism. Socialism is in the name in order to show, like, what our immediate demands are and what we immediately seek.
Okay, and the word Freedom Road, where did that come from?
You know, I don't actually know that one, I'll be honest. I think it just means that we're, a line that gets used in the organization is we're on the Freedom Road, i.e. meaning, like, we're on the journey towards building a revolution. So.
Okay. Does anybody in the audience know where Freedom Road came from for that group?
It's an abolitionist term.
Abolitionist term, okay.
Freedom Road was a road out of slavery.
Okay, so they took that word. Okay, well, you're close, that's right. Okay, so how big is your group now, and where are you?
We're all around the country, actually. We were originally based out of the Midwest, but now we have huge chapters growing out of the South. We recently started in Atlanta. We have a new chapter building in Orlando. We are, fully all around the country. We're, growing rapidly every single day. There isn't really too many places in the country these days that don't have a Free So chapter.
So do you have a newspaper or a website or anything?
We have Fight Back. Yeah, Fight Back News.
In a website?
Yeah, we have both the Fight Back website, and then we have frso.org.
And do you have a chapter here in Detroit then?
We do.
Yeah. Is it
Based
called
on
Detroit?
Southeast Michigan.
Southeast Michigan,
Yeah.
Okay. And so if anyone's interested in working with you or anything, they can find you at your website.
Yeah, we can find us at our website. We can talk to any one of our organizers. We have these nice red shirts that you can spot us at.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Red's a good color around here today. Okay, so Jackson, let's give him a nice welcome. Thank you so much. So the last introduction here of our group is Madeline STANCZAK. And Madeline, I have to say, has an amazing tattoo that we have to admire. I mean, she put a Che Guevara on her chest right there, one of our biggest revolutionary heroes, and that's quite a statement itself. But before that, let's say you're with a group called Michigan-Cuba Solidarity Committee, which, is that it?
No, it's Michigan Action for Cuba Committee.
Oh, Michigan Action for Cuba Committee. Where did I get the other thing from? All right, good. So this is obviously a newly formed group of activists who I think she'll explain more, but they went to Cuba. But before that, she's from Ypsilanti. She's a college student. She's with the CPUSA, and she's been active since 2021. Yes, and she's just returned from Cuba, as I mentioned. So give us a little more information about what happened to you when you went to Cuba, which sounds like what happened to me when I went to Cuba. But tell us about that change and that interesting information you learned when you went to this first time to Cuba, and about your group.
Sure. So as you said, it's a life-changing experience to be able to go there. We traveled, there were a number of delegations that traveled to Cuba. This spring, the IPA organized a delegation, and then I went under the National Network on Cuba, and they send brigades every year to the country to not only perform solidarity work, so that looks like working on farms, and similar types of work, but also being able to learn directly from the Cuban people, to hear from people who work in their government, and basically be able to bring back this information to the United States. And what I saw when I was there, I mean, beyond what I already knew about the Cuban Revolution and what I knew about the state of Cuba, just really instilled a sense of urgency within me, and I think everybody that traveled there alike, just in the fact that not only is the situation critical because the policies that the U.S. is enforcing against this country are genocidal, but because the struggle that is happening around Cuba is also pertinent to the struggle that we are all in the United States. So when we returned, we're defining ourselves as a working group. We're not, an official organization, but we're organizing around a set of values and ideas and immediate needs for Cuba. So those are also the goals of the NNOC, and that includes returning Guantanamo Bay to Cuba, removing the sanctions and the 60-plus year blockade against the country, alongside taking Cuba off the state sponsors of terrorism list, which it does not belong on, and only imposes more harm against the country. So we're organizing around those ideas, but specifically, we want to illuminate not only the importance of defending Cuba as a state that has a right to its own sovereignty and has a right to self-determine and to be freed of the terror that the U.S. has inflicted against it and continues to inflict against it, but to specifically highlight the importance of the Cuban Revolution, the Socialist Revolution, and the living socialist state that exists there, and how important the survival of that state is for our struggle, for international struggles, and quite frankly, for everybody.
So this is essentially a newly born collective of people who came back from Cuba.
Yes.
It's not a political organization, it's not been around a long time at all, but
No.
how do you define yourself politically? Where would you say you are on the spectrum?
I mean, I'm a member of the Communist Party, so pretty explicitly a communist.
Okay. All right. And is everyone in this group of that ilk?
No, so just like the National Network on Cuba, it's endorsed by and made up of countless left organizations. I won't say countless for us, but there are a large number of organizations working together on this. So CPUSA, PYM, MERIAM also works with us I'll refer to it as MAC. We also have General Defense Committee, BLM, and a couple of other organizations as well. So it's, you know, not all of us, as you said, like all of us sitting here, we don't necessarily agree on everything, but we are united on the fronts of anti-imperialism.
But the group's not ever going to grow because it's the group that came from Cuba on that trip, so how would you grow? Someone else would go to Cuba and coming back and join you? Is that how it works, or how do you expand?
So we're not, you know, not everybody in this group is necessarily organized either or part of an organization. We have people who are, you know, activists who are not affiliated with an organization. We have people who are simply interested as community members that support Cuba and support the cause. And right now, I mean, we're like a very, very new group, so we're trying to just be as active and as visible as possible and just let people know that we're here and that we're active. We recently had an action just in the park over here last Sunday, organizing to end Cuba's state sponsor of terror designation. And, you know, through these things we've been able to make some connections, you know, beyond just within our organizing spaces, and we hope to continue to be able to do that.
Okay, so do you have a website, a Facebook page, any way to connect with your group?
We have an email list, and we have an Instagram right now.
Instagram. Okay. Well, we want to say what that is, so if people want to check you out.
Somebody might have to fact check me on our Instagram user. I believe it's Michigan Action for Cuba. I'm pretty sure is the @ I can verify that.
Michigan Action for Cuba.
Yes.
Okay. So let's thank Madeline for being here. So that's an introduction to our expanding collective of anti-imperialist interested people and groups.
That's right on the app.
So that's the correct one. Okay, we got the right one. So this next question is going to be about terminology, which we've already used some of the words that would you like to clarify. The left is probably one of the more ambiguous terms anymore, and even imperialism, even anti-imperialism. I mean, all anti-imperialists are not necessarily anti-war. There's a lot of crossovers and there's a lot of strange divisions. So I'd like to ask the four of you to respond by just saying, I want to talk. Go ahead, Mike, and give us your understanding of what imperialism is and how your group is going to address this problem, this struggle against U.S. imperialism. So grab a mic and one at a time, whatever.
So as we define imperialism through Lenin's terminology, i.e. the merging of industrial and bank capital to create finance capital, and then, you know, the large imperialist nations trying to carve up the world in order to exploit as many markets as possible. So just straight up from Lenin's imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. How we organize around this is, you know, we've started hands-off Russia campaigns around the country. We have constantly organized against wars, and then even at home, you know, we believe in national liberation of our oppressed nations here. Like in the Black Belt South, we believe in the Black Belt thesis. We believe in New Aslan and a Chicano state in the Southwest. We believe in a Hawaiian nation that has a right to self-determination, as all these other oppressed nations. So we even look internally that, you know, the U.S. and finance capital imperializes places at home. So we organize around building a national liberation struggle and not just, you know, a worker struggle. They go hand in hand, but they are distinct. So.
Thank you. Let's get started. Anyone else want to add to that?
So in terms of imperialism, when we look at Cuba, I think that though it's not a new tactic from the U.S., I think that imperialism shows up slightly differently in the case of Cuba. I think, I'll say stereotypically, we look at examples of the U.S. illegally occupying or invading another country to take advantage of markets or of the labor of the people of that nation. But when we're looking at Cuba, we're looking at the U.S. intervening and apprehending a socialist state so that socialism does not spread outside of this nation. And what we see as the intention of that is not so that the U.S. can directly simply control Cuba and the markets and the labor in Cuba and to profit off that, because realistically, the US is losing out on millions and millions of dollars every single year by not doing business with Cuba and from preventing other countries from doing business with Cuba. But instead, what the intention with this is that I believe that, and I believe we believe that, we know that the US empire is threatened by socialism. It does not want socialism to spread. And as socialism spreads outside of Cuba, and in US terms infects other countries, this is a greater threat to the US imperial empire, to all the capital that the US has seized, than whatever millions of dollars that they are losing out on by not doing business with Cuba.
Yeah, I think the figure's in a trillion. I think they just released figures of how much damage the blockade has done for the last 70 years. In the trillions of dollars, and the lives lost because of that blockade through medicine and other reasons.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's part of the damage caused by our empire.
So in the context of the Palestinian struggle, imperialism has the material way it shows up of the domination of Palestinian land and Palestinian people, their extermination, theft of land, erasure of their histories, culture, and existence. And then it's also, it requires to have kind of an ideological underpinning. I think all imperialism does, but specific to Palestine, some of these ideological underpinnings are the Zionist state is bringing civilization to the Middle East, that they're fixing a backwards population that's uncivilized, that there were never any people there to begin with, so it's okay to just take that land. And that the land is the God-given right for the Jewish people. So regardless of whether there were people there or not, this absolves them of any subsequent action. And so, yeah, so it's really that material action and the material impacts, but the ideological underpinnings that are really important.
Okay, so I'm a geologist. I prefer looking at rocks and dealing with political theories and things like that. But when in this work that I've been doing lately, militarism and climate change, and I look, as Bill said, 800 bases around the world, complaining about China, which has less than 10, and Russia that has less than 30. And we're complaining that they want to expand, like China wants to expand their bases. I mean, why are we doing this? Why are we spending more than the next 10 to 12 countries combined on our military? A book that I would highly recommend by David Vine, which is The United States of War, essentially does a psychoanalysis of the United States all the way from its founding, even pre-revolution, where it's always expanding west, and then when the west runs out, when it runs into the Pacific Ocean, then it keeps going, as you said, in Hawaii, and coaling bases for ships, and on and on and on. So we've been imperialistic all this time, and I can't see how we can push our imperial agenda and honestly deal with climate change, because the rest of the world recognizes this. Why should they spend a whole bunch of money on climate change if we're spending over 20 times more on our military and pushing imperialism? It's ridiculous.
Yeah, thanks. So we're going to also invite our friends here to ask questions and talk after we're done with these three. So, your voice is important also. So I want to address the imperialism, the cultural imperialism. And the fact that, just an example, recently I read that some film became the biggest money-making gross, what would you call it, the highest grossing film in history. In history, more people saw it, they made more money. And it was a Chinese film. And we're so used to Hollywood blockbusters and all the millions of dollars they all make. Not that I didn't know there was another part of the world besides the US, but there are other people make movies also. And China makes lots of movies, and millions of people see those movies. We don't usually get to see those. And this one was called The Battle of Changchun. I think that's the one that became the first big blockbuster. And it's a story about the Korean War from the other side, which we don't often get to hear that side. This is from the Chinese side. I mean, there are facts and there are opinions, and most Americans who don't want to hear the other side say, well, that's the lie, so why listen to that side? Just listen to our own side. But that's how a lot of us, if I hate to use the word brainwash, but we're so indoctrinated into accepting that there's only one source for truth in the media and in the internet and all that. It's from the West. We're the ones that are defenders of democracy and freedom and truth. But many of you, I know probably all of you, have discovered there's lots outside of the mainstream media. And that's another way that they continue this hegemony over the world, where everyone thinks that this is the best system, this is the best way to live, we have the best ideas, you gotta all live like us. So not only militarily, we make sure, if you look at some of these charts on the wall that we have put up for this event, if you look at a map of the world and the US military bases, they're all around China and Russia. How many Chinese bases are around the US? Is there one? I don't know. I don't think there's even one. Does that say anything to anybody? Can you just look at that and see that it's so obvious? So now China's going to maybe bring something to Cuba. I heard about the other day, soldiers or something like that, or start I don't know. Boy, that's a shock. The US ain't gonna let that happen. 10 soldiers? No, we got it. It's totally unfair and unjust. So the culture has sustained and strengthened our imperialism. The wars, military, and the economic control of the dollar. So that's the term imperialism, and I guess it's more economic than anything else. The term came from that use of it. But the other term that we throw around a lot that I'd like to address with our guests is the term left, which is a very loose term. I remember when I write a film column for the People's World, I've written that for 30, 40 years, when I first started, I had trouble naming the column. What should I call it? The progressive cinema, or the left cinema, or the communist cinema, or what? You know, what do you call it? And so I just used progressive, which I've written for many years as progressive cinema. But that word itself has also become diluted. So it's very hard now to define a left. And this, I really would like our panelists to dig deep on this one, because there's a large group of people that are called the phony left. I mean, those are the lefties that we don't agree with or whatever. There's there's leftists who think we should send weapons to Ukraine and continue the war and use Ukrainian and Russian soldiers to carry out our proxy war, but we should fund them. And then there's the left who are totally opposed to that. So the left is very wide and has very extreme differences in the left. So how can we use that term anymore? And is your group part of the left or the phony left? Let's find out.
I guess I'll start. I don't really use the term left or leftist. I think it's a word that has become devoid of all meaning. If you were asked someone in Friso how they define themselves, they would say they're a Marxist-Leninist. They would not say we're a leftist, or that wouldn't be a first word to be used. But you know, when we look at people who call Joe Biden a leftist, people who call Bernie Sanders a leftist, as you said, you know, there's people who call for people like the Azov Battalion and the Adar Battalion and all these other, you know, paramilitaries in Ukraine to get weapons. Those people can be called leftists. People who want to overthrow the Cuban government can be called leftists, or call themselves leftists. People who support Zionism can call themselves leftists. And so I just believe it's a term that just should be devoid of usage. You know, you can use progressive if you're trying to appeal to different people. Like when we have done canvassing campaigns in Chicago, to support community control of the police, we said we were supporting progressive candidates. We didn't say we were supporting leftist candidates, because it fundamentally doesn't mean anything. And I think that's how we would look at it.
Thank you. I appreciate that, because a lot of my friends have said the same thing, yes. Let's stop using the term left because it's so confusing. But you raised another issue when you said Marxist-Leninist. Okay, so there's a spectrum of history of leadership. There's Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin, Mao, I mean, Hoxha, whoever else you want to put in there. So just out of curiosity, be as honest as you can. I'm going to say the names and raise your hand if you support their writings and their beliefs. Let's start with Marx. Do we have Marxists out here? Okay. How about Engels? That would be the same, I would think. Okay, what about Lenin? Okay, what about Stalin? What about Mao? All right, so there's differences, slightly.
You haven't read them, so you can't really say.
Yeah, well, you have to read them. Okay, so here.
My question is, I mean, I'm keeping my hand down because being a scientist, I don't like to say I support something unless I've actually studied it. So I haven't raised my hand.
That's good explanation. I also call myself a Marxist, but I haven't read a lot of Marx myself. I've just listened to other friends that tell me what Marx said, you know, and I believe it. So I'm not going to read Capital. That's too damn long. You know, it's like. Oh, is that it? You read Lenin, so you're going to have to read Marx. Marx was very verbose, and he wrote in another language. He had his own language that he developed. His what do you call that? Iconography or whatever. Different.
German?
No, not German. No, he made up terminology that hadn't been used before, and you had to know what words he meant and how he defined them in order. So it got more and more complicated. And, I finally found a book of Marx Capital annotated. That helps a lot because it does explain the old terminology. It's got pictures too, yes. So, you know. That's always been a struggle. There's so much to learn, and there's so many writers, and I've just picked 5 right there, but there's others. What other names should we know about in that lineage that we just talked about? Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin, Mao. Who did I miss?
Ho Chi Minh.
Of course, Ho Chi Minh. Kim Il-sung. Fidel. Yes, I've seen pictures with them all, with Fidel there, yes. All right. So these are all great thinkers. I mean, we may not accept all, but how wonderful it is to have such an ability to have this kind of thought going around, to think about it, develop, and they all developed off of each other. I mean, Stalin and Mao were relatively close. What about Khrushchev? Do we call him Khrushchev one of those lineage? You know, well, when Khrushchev came around, Mao left the house, so that's what happened there. We had the big split, and then there's splits and splits and splits, and that's what's happened to the left. The Marxist, Engels, Leninist, Stalinist, Maoist, the left, whatever we want to call it. So what we're trying to do here is overcome that division, that split. We freely can talk about each other's beliefs and argue them and accept people as human beings. That's the most important part, because I think one of Che's most famous quotes, and I wish I could say it correctly, it's, do you know it? The one about, it's almost absurd to say this, but a true revolutionary.
It's about love. Yeah, about love.
He said, at the risk of sounding ridiculous, I believe that the true revolutionary is guided by great feelings of love, and it's hard to imagine a true revolutionary who lacks this quality.
Thank you, Madeline. You just made my day. I appreciate that. That's one of my favorite quotes, and I didn't never memorize them. Bad at memorizing. Anyone else want to address this left issue, the idea of left? Are you left? Or are you a fake left?
I think I just resonate with everything Jackson said. People, like, if someone says, you know, I'm leftist, then I always just prompt, like, what does that mean to you? Because I think it's just a really broad term that is easy, but it's, again, not meaningful. I think it might be more relevant when we're talking about, like, a broad collection of different organizations that all fall somewhere different. But I think it's really important to define exactly what you stand for, and left doesn't really do that.
So find a substitute, please, somebody, for the term left. A 4-letter word, maybe, that's easy to say.
And maybe I should go. I'm probably the right-wing wingnut here in this group.
Wait, we just canceled left, so we got to cancel right too.
I suppose that's right. So My sister always say that my parents took the wrong kid home because my whole family is Republican. Let's see, I voted for McGovern, the first president, my election. Okay, so, but
That's two of us.
two of us, yeah. Well, now,
Me and you.
Hillary Clinton voted for McGovern too. So just put that there, and 3 people voted. So as far as where Veterans for Peace stands. I consider myself leftist. I led a bunch of stuff with my phone number and email and a whole bunch of posters and stuff in Houston, putting out a display outside of the Republican State Convention, a bunch of flags and stuff. That was interesting when they all came out that one particular day in downtown Houston. So I consider myself left, but when I'm talking to the other folks that have been active in Veterans for Peace a lot more, I ran into one guy called the Pirate Santa. When he was a teenager, he and another guy commandeered a freighter and took it to Cambodia. It was filled with napalm. He did one of these, told the captain and the crew to get off, and he sailed. Of course, he spent many years in prison for that. Then there's a lot of folks that have been arrested numerous times. I've only been arrested a couple of times. So I don't know where I fit in on that. But I consider myself leftish. I don't know.
Well, I think we're giving examples of how left is not an accurate term to use to define anybody. It does give you an idea where someone's at if they call themselves a leftist. I mean, at least they're not what is used the term rightist. You get a better sense, but even then, it's not totally accurate because they're defining themselves and you're defining someone else. So it's very hard to know where you're at personally in the eyes of other people. It's difficult to define the left, and I think we've sort of started to prove that. But I do want to raise this other concern about, like in America, where the Democrats and Republicans. Some people call the Republicans the right and Democrats the left. Other people think they're both duopoly, both capitalist parties. That doesn't matter whether they're left or right, they're still defending the system. And I think what's happened since I've been born and since I've been a voting member of society, I've always had to choose the lesser of 2 evils. I always felt that way. And now I see what's really going on. It's just like Democrats come into power and screw things up, and then the Republicans come in and screw things up, and then the Democrats come back and screw things up. And it's all my life it's been like that. And we're staying within a little realm of politics. Systemically, they're supporting imperialism, first of all. This is where it comes down to. I think they're supporting the right to go run the world and take over the world and control the world. They support that, whether you're a good human being or a mean person or whatever, you're still supporting the system because we've all been indoctrinated to think this is the best system, so why wouldn't we want to support the system? We're free, we love people, we're democratic and all that. And there's many great people in the country, right and left people who are good human beings. So the question now is there's a movement called patriotic socialism or whatever, I think it's something like that. And this is defining people away from the left and the right. This is saying, like, look, these Trumpers or whatever, they support Trump because Trump was the alternative to the corruption that the Democrats created. So there wasn't a left alternative to go to. So they went to the right, or if we're using those terms, and took someone as extreme as Trump, another capitalist party representative, an oligarchy supporter. That group is not much different than the Democrats for many people. Some here don't believe that. That's all right. Keep that right. But the point is that we've never really, I don't think, had a true choice in elections for an alternative to a capitalist option. And I know years ago it was much easier for the Communist Party to run candidates and other leftist parties. There's still a chance for a few of them to run the Green Party, maybe, if you define that as left or right. And there's People's Party now, Cornel West, and this whole new exciting challenge to what terminology means. People's Party, Cornel West, DSA, Social Democrats. This is all very complex. Communist, socialist. It's difficult. So I'm curious if any of you know about these this movement to define these people, followers of Trump, or what we call right-wingers, as being actually revolutionaries in some sense. I mean, they carry other elements we don't like, as far as racist and other things. But are they against, I'm not defending Trump by any means. I'm trying to say that there's people saying that the people who follow Trump are good human beings. They might have been fooled into some things. They might be learned that they love people, they love their family like everybody else does. There's a lot of common ground there. And as Madeline said, Che's favorite quote, you have to accept people as human beings first. As far as you might disagree with them, you have to accept people as human beings. And however they got to their point of view, find out how they got there and get them to what you think is the right way to be. But I know, Jackson, you had some excitement about that subject, so maybe you can...
It's not excitement. It's definitely not excitement, I should say that.
No, good.
I guess I'll just say broadly that the quote-unquote thinkers of patriotic socialist types are just LaRouche's. Like, we've seen this in the actions they did. I think it was out in like Sterling Heights or wherever Trump had a rally like a year ago. A couple of these patriotic socialist types went out there and they're holding, LaRouche signs. So they're not even communists. B, to the Trumper kind of question, a lot of my family are from very rural parts of Michigan, are, politically backwards, are Trumpites, yet, many of them working class, yada, yada, yada. And I think there's a certain characteristic in there that some of these people are intermediaries that can be won over, but for the most part, if we look at like these QAnon types, they are fascistic. Like, they don't care that they're working class. They have been so thoroughly duped into a near cult-like following that, I remember one of my friends, her mom is one of these QAnon, type people, and on January 6th, she had 40 different stories throughout the day as to what was going on, depending on how it would fit her message. At the start of the day, it's amazing. Oh my God, they're going to free America. As the day goes on, oh my God, I can't believe the police are stopping these people. They're good, fighting for America. And then, what does it turn to when everything goes awry? People are getting shot, it's pointed out as bad. Oh no, they're actually Antifa the whole time. They were actually never Trumpers. They were never any of that. So when we look at this, I don't think those people can be won over. They've been so thoroughly duped. Their brain tossed into the washer, the Kool-Aid drink. It is impossible to win these people. But, maybe there are some sort of segments of Trumpers that, aren't so gung-ho about their beliefs and simply, like West Virginia, I think is a good example. West Virginia voted for Obama, voted for Clinton. Two people that offered, quote, in some belief, change, and thought that they were going to get finally a good end of the deal after being destroyed by finance capital for 100 years in the form of coal mines. And then they vote for Trump. I don't think I think that's a segment of people who can be won over, but to say the broad term that Trumpers are somehow working class icons that we should focus our whole spirit and energy at winning, I think is a diluted type of idea. To build a left, we need to win over the intermediates and progressives that can be won and try to isolate the backwards and the reactionaries. And if you're so soaked up in reactionaryisms that you don't care about wanting to support workers' rights because you're caught up on people being gay and your Starbucks cup having a rainbow on it, you can't be won over. We can't build revolution with these kind of people.
So do you call these people the right wing?
I would call them rightists, reactionaries, if you want to not use right wing. Opportunists. Oh yeah, patriotic socialists, we're talking about them, not Trumpers. Yeah, I'd say they're opportunists who see, a dollar to be made. I even think that they're that. They're just cash cows who see the LaRouche Institute as a way to get a buck.
Okay, so you accept the term right wing, but you won't want to use the term left wing.
I mean, I feel like in our sense of organizing, if I look at someone in the crowd and do something to organize with, I wouldn't want to use the term left wing because you might be a Zionist if you say left wing, because there's left wing Zionists. You can support America and still be left wing, or the American colonial project or American capitalism and still be left wing. But right wing, I'm not organizing with right wingers. So I can use that as a broad term to say these people are on the right, but I don't even really like to use that. I like to use the term reactionary.
Reactionary, yes, that's good too. So as much as you don't want to, and we don't want to define the left as one solid group of thinking the same way it is, and it's amalgamous. But it's the same with the right wing. The right wing is very expansive. There's many different degrees of it, like you gave a few examples. So does anybody else want to address that issue?
I'll just make one personal observation. I don't know if it means anything or not, but again, I'm a geologist. I'm mostly worried. I apologize to the young folks here screwing up the planet for you. Concentrating on climate change. I spent 4 years working with a very middle-of-the-road group called Citizens Climate Lobby, and they would talk to everybody, right and left, and I've been to Washington numerous times. After January 6th, I could not see myself going into a Republican office holder's office and, restraining myself from punching the guy in the nose, especially Representative Bergman, 1st District up in the Upper Peninsula. The guys took an oath as an officer in the military, and he's essentially an insurrectionist. So things like that, where they're traitors or they've gone against their oath, I can't deal with those kind of folks. But that's just my observation.
Okay, so we just touched the surface of terminology. There's lots of terms, and there's communism versus socialism versus capitalism, the whole spectrum of different understandings of what those stages are. Colonialism versus imperialism, class struggle, identity politics. There's all sorts of terminology that we all come across and work with in our group and stuff. So you're going to have a chance to talk. If you want to address any of those, feel free to. We're just touching the surface, and we're going to do it in a minute. We got one more question for our panelists, and this is pretty much to conclude our discussion of our groups and how we work together. What can we do together? How do we connect with each other? What's the importance of your group in the struggle, and how can we find ways to overcome the problems of the right wing, or whatever we want to call it? Essentially, how do we defeat imperialism is what the ultimate question is. How do we defeat that? But along that line, what's the positive steps you have for how we can do this? We've expanded our group this session. This is the 5th one. We had 4 groups in each one, so now we've represented at least 20 groups around Southeast Michigan that have some common interests around imperialism, and I know there's many more. I don't know how many more panels we're going to have like this. We're going to have to move on and deal with move the money campaigns and these specific issues. But imperialism's network is everywhere. It's involved in everything we talk about, and over the years of my struggles in different issues, I've somehow settled on the fact that it's a systemic problem. We have to change this system, and it's imperialism is the problem. And it can only be overcome once the population really realizes what's going on, and along with the rest of the world who has gone way further than us in understanding the real problems in the world. And things are being done around the world. And maybe we'll catch up with those people, those activists, those revolutionaries like Fidel and Che for so long. They were so ahead of where the U.S. is right now, and we've got to learn from history and all these great thinkers. So this is the purpose of this, just to get to know each other and see where we can go and work together. So if you can address that concern, and how do you think we can find common ground?
Sure. So on this question, I'll speak both anecdotally, just from what I've learned being in Cuba, since I'm speaking for Cuba today. I keep thinking I want to speak for CPUSA, sorry. But, and then I'll also speak just from what I've learned studying the Cuban Revolution and studying this movement. What I walked away with from Cuba that is very much in line with everything that I've learned about the revolution in my own time is that above all else, there is a sense of radical love, radical unity, and radical solidarity that lives in Cuba and lives in the people. And part of why I take so much importance in Cuba and why, you know, even before I traveled to Cuba, I mean, I'm also Cuban American, I didn't mention that, but it has a very big place in my heart, and this struggle has a very big place in my heart, because what we see in Cuba that we do not see here in large enough numbers is unity among people and the ability to come together on something on a united front without being constantly divided by micro disagreements by personal agenda, by personal feelings and personal sentiments. To me, as an organizer, you know, MAC, CPUSA, whatever, I think the bottom line to unity above all else should always be looking at another person, looking at another group, and being able to humanize your fellow comrade, your fellow person, your fellow human being, because that, what we see in Cuba, that barrier has very much been broken down. Being able to look at your neighbor and to rely on your neighbor and to love your neighbor regardless of whether or not they disagree with you, that's not something that we have here. And that's not even something that we totally have in our movement spaces. A lot of the time, you know, we look at, you know, there are several people in this room who will call themselves Marxist-Leninists, but do we fully agree on everything? No. And I'm not saying that we have to, but, you know, if we want to build a movement, we want to build a revolution, we want to build mass unity, we have to be able to, in many ways, look at what Cuba has done and look at how they have been able to identify what their common oppressor is and to be unified on that main front, even if there are smaller things in between that the people do not agree on with one another.
Thank you, Madeline. Well, you sort of made a statement that was very important there, that I didn't realize you were Cuban American. That's an important factor in this story here. So, because I love the Cuban people, and this, as you described it here, the society that they've built is just gives you opportunity to see how people can work together and how they can love one another. I wish it on everybody that you get a chance to go to Cuba, and hopefully see that element that Madeline's talking about. Because there's different factions on the island too, but I would have asked you more about your Cuban background if I'd have known that at the beginning. But I do want to ask you quickly, were you born in the U.S.?
Yeah, I was born in the U.S. I'm Afro-Latina, so my ancestors are from Nigeria, but they were brought over to Panama, Cuba, and Puerto Rico during the slave trade.
Beautiful. Anyone else want to please address this question of bringing together common ground?
Yeah, I guess I'll go. I believe what Madeline said was like one for one, exactly what, you know, a lot of us need to do. But I'd also add the point of like, I think it's so easy for us to like find points of unity that we don't have to, you know, tomorrow merge organizations and do all this stuff and follow each other's line and, you know, do all this sort of tailing. But we can find points of unity, like what you know, we did for May Day. We had all these groups come around, you know, not all of them were red groups. We had unions come out, we had GEO come out, we had the SEIU, UAW, the Teamsters, we had PYM, we had a Knock Bayan, you know, we had all these groups come together. A band, not going to get into it, but you know, we had groups who wanted to come together and wanted to have points of unity around supporting the working class, and that was our points of unity to work together. So I think, you know, find more and more of that. Look at here today, we found points of unity to come about, to talk, to listen to each other's ideas, and I guess I'll pitch a point that FRSO and SDS are putting on an event July the 8th. I'll go quickly into that, is down in Tampa, we had 5 Students for Democratic Society members at the University of South Florida be brutalized by the police for running a black student drive and trying to raise diversity on campus. And the police simultaneously told them to exit the building as they were grabbing them and assaulting them and brutalizing, you know, 5 women that were completely and utterly unable to react. And now 4 of them are facing 10 years in prison, 2 felonies each, and one of them is facing 1 felony and 5 years for simply organizing and trying to be, you know, an activist and support, you know, local issues around campus. They were known for supporting, you know, the right to abortion against the Florida abortion bans, supporting, you know, hands off Russia and anti-imperialist work, and they get absolutely brutalized and beaten, and one was groped by a police officer during their arrest. So we're trying to organize a teach-in as a way to show that, you know, activism shouldn't be a crime. Protesting shouldn't be a crime. and that we should be able to come together and support any activist, that it should not be illegal and you should not allow police to brutalize and use the police terror on anyone for simply just believing that, our fundamental rights to protest and all these things. So I think that's a point of unity that we can get together. If anyone's interested, we have a Facebook page about it, and we can you can talk to any organizer more. But it's stuff like that, things that we can come around and say, I agree with you on this. Let's do something about it. I agree with you on this. We need to fight back. We need to come together. So I think it's all about finding points of unity.
This is like, I don't know, just a very interesting progression in the conversation, because PYM, our current focus here in the Detroit metro area is building our base in the Arab communities, which, a lot of work on forging unity is at the forefront right now. There's a lot of variety in political orientations and political standings, and so it's quite the beast to tackle. But given that, it's our priority because we need to raise the level of political consciousness, and too many of us are normalizing with the Zionist state and with the CIA, and with all of these entities that we shouldn't be inviting into our homes and our religious institutions and all of these things. So that's kind of our direction right now. But then at the same time, we do a lot of cross movement work. So we collaborate. I think it's really important to connect the dots of our struggle with other struggles, as we've all been talking about. I think also celebrating resistance and small wins is very important. That's something that I also we talked a little bit about coming out of Cuba this year. It's hard to find wins sometimes. It's just a really challenging time we're living in, I think. But resistance itself is a win, and it's worthwhile to celebrate that. So each other's wins, Recently, just last December, Dr. Matula Shakur was released from prison, and that's a huge win. Unfortunately, we have actually a current campaign PYM is working on is the release of Walid Daqa, who is a Palestinian political prisoner who was supposed to be released back in March, is being indefinitely detained for no reason, and his health is declining. And so we see all of these parallels in struggle. Prisoners are the compass of our movement, and we really need to be elevating that, among in between all of our movements and all of our organizations. I think we just need to look for wherever we see resistance and model our work after it.
I just want to add on to what has been said. We need to cooperate. I mean, my organization is in the individual chapters. I mean, we have a few thousands of members, but they're spread out over 130 chapters. We need to work with other folks. We've done a lot of work with Code Pink in the Palestine-Gaza blockade issue, and we're still working with Code Pink in the climate issue. Another thing we've got, it's going to be sort of a fun thing that's coming up, is we have this boat called the Golden Rule. Back in the 50s, a bunch of Quakers were going to sail it from Hawaii into the Marshall Islands to break up the airborne tests of nuclear weapons. Of course, they didn't make it. They got arrested. The boat was impounded. Well, Veterans for Peace folks have gotten out of the mud, and they're now sailing it. They sailed it from Minneapolis after transporting it from, they sailed from Hawaii to San Francisco, then they trucked it to Minneapolis, and they went down the Mississippi. They stopped in Cuba for a couple of days. Now they're somewhere on the East Coast, and they'll be in Michigan in Detroit area in August. There's some brochures on the back table. Grab one. Visit some of the things. The boat will be open for display out on the riverfront. So we need to work together. I've been trying to make as many marches as I can. And events like trying to crash Cranholm's event the other day. Yeah, so we need to work together.
All right, thanks, Jim. All right, guys, so we got about 30 minutes left for Q&A from the audience, discussions, and our friend, comrade Cameron is going to organize this thing with us. Where'd Cameron go? He was right there. Oh, Cameron, are you ready? Are you available?
Hi everybody, I'm Sammy Lewis of the Detroit Club CPUSA. I am really excited that this panel has continued, and I love the focus on unity. So I wanted to ask, with as many different issues as organizers are fighting against, how do we build stronger coalitions to connect our issues more, and how do we build class consciousness among the masses with a focus on deep organizing to really make sure that people are coming in and sticking around versus just showing up for one quick thing?
Thank you for the short question, under 2 minutes. Now, our responses, also keep our responses short if we can. Anybody who want to say anything, feel free to. If you want to address any questions, just ask for the mic.
Well, there are a number of websites. I know the Michigan Peace Alliance has a website for Michigan-wide events, and I'm sure there's other Gray Panthers and things like that inside Detroit to put your events, try and get them out so other people can join. That's, again, I'm new here, only been here for 7 years, and 2 of those years was COVID, so I feel like I'm a new kid on the block. You folks know a lot more about how to get things done than I do.
All right, well, we discussed pretty much that point in the last question, how we can work together and all, so I hope when you watch the video, you'll be reminded of that. But did you want to say something already? No. Okay. All right, next question? Comment, either way.
My name is Noah. I'm with the Washtenaw County CPUSA. And I wanted to ask if you're talking to someone that is not an organizer, they don't know much about politics, and you have one point to make a connection with them, make your organization meaningful to them, what do you say to them?
So I think Noah probably knows the answer to your question since we know each other already. But I would say the way that I always approach this type of thing is not so much to present people with an organization or to let them know that there's something within your organization that's relevant to them, but again, just on kind of the last thing I was talking about, just to show up for somebody as a friend or a neighbor or an ally in some way, and to remind them of the humanness that is constantly stripped from all of us living in this system. And I think that being able to make that authentic connection with somebody is what speaks to people and encourages people to stick around and to, you get them to come to some protest, but they never show up again. And maybe that has more to do with them than it has to do with you or what you said to them. But I think that being able to, connect with people on the fact that we're human and connect with people on something that affects them personally, and we've talked about this, not to make this a conversation just between you and I, but like being able to bring somebody to something that means a lot to them, that really affects them personally, is reflective of the ways in which they are oppressed or the struggles that they face. And again, not so much to present them with, you know, a proposition to join the party or to join another organization, but just to let them know that there are other people out there that are also struggling for the same things, and that give them some type of experience that shows them that it isn't valueless to go out and to be a part of these types of things.
I'm Josh from the Communist Party Detroit Club, also Team Sterritt, Local 243. So a comment that Jackson made brought up some questions, and to preface that, I'm not, you know, talking about the opportunists like Karen mentioned, you know, the elite right-wing politicians, these LaRouges, whatever you call them, or these patriot guys or whatever. But I mean the working masses, the Trump supporters. Is it that they have been drinking the Kool-Aid, or has it been a failure of the left to organize that, and it has been given up to the fascist right? Second thing, is it wise to surrender and concede the working masses to the right, fascist right? And thirdly, how the hell do I organize my workplace when they're all Trump supporters? Big strike coming up, so those are my questions.
So I guess to start at the beginning, why I think a lot of, I'm going to talk particularly about rural people because a lot of my family is from rural Michigan and rural West Virginia, so I know to particularly talk to that. But I think why a lot of rural areas went to the right, and especially to Trump, is because the Democrats commonly, you'll see it on Twitter, you'll see it in the news, call them like rural yokels that deserve what they get, and will constantly be told that they deserve to live in poverty, that they're stupid, that they're ignorant, and that's why they vote the way they do. Even as, you know, there's no money in their communities. In Michigan, you know, school funding is based off of property tax. And if you're living in small, tiny houses in a small community, your school doesn't have any money. Like, the school my mom graduated out of is a consolidated 1 through 12 school with 30 kids in a graduating class. Teachers will be teaching 3 grades at once. How are those kids supposed to get a good education, you know? So when you look at that, those particular situations of rural people, whites in the South, rural people in the Midwest, you know, Appalachia in general, you know, I think have become fixated on Trump because Trump supposedly offered some change and was going to actually help their communities. He talked about the opioid crisis and how many people have died, you know, and he did nothing. But they're still due. So I think that answers the first part. I think the second part is that we shouldn't surrender anything to the right. There's no real organizations doing rural organizing because there isn't, you know, the population or space to do so. But, you know, I think you try to work to these people on working class issues. But I'm not going to surrender my support for LGBT rights. I'm not going to surrender my support for abortion. I'm not going to surrender, you know, my support for Cuba or China or anything like that in order to build some sort of working class base, but I still think we should go to these people and fight for, you know, funding for their schools, jobs campaigns. Like I recently went up to Big Rapids, which is in Mecosta County. It's a very small city with a big college known as Fair State, and they're building a battery factory there that's Chinese. It's called the Goshen Battery Plant. It's going to create 2,300 permanent jobs and hundreds of temporary construction jobs. And I went door knocking to these people. There was Trump flags on people's houses. I still knocked, and I talked to them because there was violent racist protests months before that were calling and said they didn't want communist involvement in their town. They didn't want Chinese people in their town. And I knocked on all these houses, and not a single person even mentioned China, even mentioned Asian people. So it showed that A, these protests were fraudulent and astroturf, but B, that people there, even with Trump flags on their houses, want jobs and don't care if China's giving them jobs, don't care about who's giving them jobs. They simply want livable wages. And I had dozens of conversations with just poor people from these communities, and they were more than happy to want to have diversity, that they want, on the simple fact of just a jobs campaign. So I think, you know, organizing these people is possible, and we don't have to compromise our positions about it.
My name is Stephen Boyce. I just wanted to speak briefly that I think you're in a rush to give up left and right nets in the state. Those are a very accurate historical model for analyzing political dynamics. In the French Assembly, National Assembly, after the king was overthrown, Those that wanted a fundamental social transformation sat on the left. Those that wanted to coalesce around progressive aristocrats in the church sat on the right. To this day, those people who are pushing for fundamental social change are to some degree on the left. And those that do not are on the right, even if it's in a radical organization. And I'll ask my comrade from PYM. I see the Palestinian revolution as threatening not just Zionism, but corrupt Arab regimes, which are dependent on U.S. imperialism and are falling over themselves to recognize Israel now. And that the slogan of the Palestinian revolution I always remember is, revolution until victory. And that to me is a left-wing slogan and should be claimed as such.
Agreed, yeah. Thank you for that comment. Sure, if there was a question.
I do want to ask Steve, though. Yes, I don't think we can abandon the left or right spectrum. That's not what I was saying. I'm saying we have to abandon the concept that all left is the same or all left is over here, that there's not commonality across the whole spectrum. Those are important terms. And yes, they started with the French monarchy and all that stuff. But so from now on, when we have these meetings, I would like all the leftists to sit over here and all the rightists to sit over this thing. Okay, you're next slide. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is Lon Herman. I would like to sit down and discuss at length with all of you because every single one of you has an issue that I've been part of. I have a brother who fought in Vietnam, so I'm familiar with veterans. I have supported Disarm, which was Ed Asner's group that sent supplies to Cuba, medical supplies when the U.S. embargo has cut them off. I am a member of the Metro Detroit DSA, so I'd like to talk to my socialist brother here to get some ideas. And I've supported BDS. But since I only have one question, I wanted to ask Meyer, have you had connections with the Israeli left that supports Palestinian rights, and could you talk about that?
In our chapter, no. Our position on movements in the Zionist state is that anything that exposes the contradictions is a good thing, and I think there's more and more of that coming up. So there are definitely positive movements happening, but that's not really our focus. I think there's on the homeland connections of people in Palestine and then people, settlers, fighting for Palestinian liberation and, decolonization. But that's not our focus. That's kind of where we stand.
I'm Catherine with the Michigan Peace Council, and I have a question. Is it MERIAM or MERIAM? MERIAM. My question is for you. When you answered the original question about imperialism, maybe I missed it, but I didn't hear you really say anything about the role of Israel in U.S. imperialism, and I think that we always need to keep that in mind because it's not just that the U.S. hates Palestinians, it's that the U.S. wants to let Israel do anything that they decide to do to carry out their imperialist agenda there. So I don't know if you want to comment on that. And the only other thing was that from the time that we started organizing against the Iraq War, the most divisive thing over and over again has been Palestine. And I'm afraid that that could be happening again because I see some people who are saying that they're in the war right now, and they just don't think that certain people's positions on Palestine are that big of a deal, and we should ignore it. And I think that that is not something that we overlook in seeking unity. I think it's a red line issue, and I wonder what you would say about that.
Yeah, definitely Palestine is a stronghold for the U.S. in the imperial project. that was like in its design. It was like, you know, when the borders were drawn up by the British Empire and France and all of the imperial powers, that was the intent, was to have an imperial stronghold you know, and in the face of Arab nationalism and the social projects that were growing, this focus of the US has only gotten stronger and stronger to like dissolve resistance, you know, in any way. Over the decades, they've come up with so many different ways to tackle, you know, the issue of resistance that they're framing as barbarism or whatever. And so, yeah, thank you for bringing that up. In terms of Palestine being, you know, it's kind of like a litmus test, I think, in the West. I think that's a really accurate way to look at it. I think, though, it's really not that hard to frame, you know, to people that maybe just don't have the information. It's like there's just really strong propaganda. So, you know, it's not complicated, it's not like a conflict, it's just really simple, like oppressor and people resisting oppression and having the right to do so. I really like think, you know, it's easy to connect the dots with what's happening on people's own doorsteps. Like, I don't know if anyone here is aware, but some of the largest landlords in America you know, are also landlords in Palestine and Zionist state, and they have property there and they're developing there, and that's like one really easy connection, for example. So I think the pathways to turn people over to our side are very like easy. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Jacob Smith, Freedom Road Socialist Organization. This question is just for anybody. So what tactics have you found effective in resisting war and imperialism? And more broadly, what overall strategy should we be taking in our efforts to smash the Western imperialist project?
I might not like this, but the draft. The draft. I mean, drafted soldiers ended the Vietnam War. So, and they got rid of the draft, and we've had how many wars since then? So, not very popular, but if your own ass is on the line, you might be on the streets trying to stop the war, or if your kid's ass is on the line. So, just something to consider.
Well, the U.S. learned that an important thing when they lost the Vietnam War. They learned that we can't send our soldiers over to fight anymore. We have to let them kill each other over there. So we just send the weapons and the military support. We're going to have body bags coming home and we take over the world. Pretty cool.
Hi, my name is Avi. I'm with Washtenaw CP USA, and my questions are primarily for Miriam and Madeline, but I guess anyone that has insight could answer. So my question is, what can we in the US, in our organizations, do to materially support both the Cuban and Palestinian causes, and vice versa, I guess more relevant for Cuba, but how can, you know, Cuba or Palestine, the Palestinian, you know, liberation movement or whatever, assist us in, you know, achieving revolution in the US, that way we can actually end imperialism?
I think I'm understanding the question correctly. In terms of how we can support Cuba, I would say, though it's not totally accessible for a lot of reasons, I think one of the biggest is simply going there. What was instilled into me, and I think a lot of us being there, is how important it is to have living and breathing people who have been to Cuba and can counteract the propaganda and the misinformation that exists in the US. And again, be able to have connections with our friends and our neighbors and our comrades about Cuba, and to build connections about that, and to allow that information to spread, and to allow the truth of what's happening in Cuba to actually spread, to be able to share with people just some of the basic facts about Cuba that are completely misconstrued within American media. And more materially, again, going there, depending on how you do it, is supportive to the Cuban economy. Additionally, medicine drives. It's difficult because the vast majority of the materials that Cuba is lacking due to U.S. intervention are not things that we can simply organize to be sent over there because they are too massive. But medicine is something that they are critically lacking and something that we also brought a lot of over when we traveled there. So that is something tangible and material that can be brought to Cuba.
I think in both contexts, I can speak a little bit about how we can support the Palestinian struggle from here, but it's also lessons that can be generalizable more broadly. But anything that weakens the empire is a way that we're helping, and that also includes things that like support people here who are struggling. So in Chicago, there was a Boeing factory, and Boeing is, widely known as manufacturing airplanes, but they also actually have a huge weapons industry, and not a lot of people know that, and they supply weapons to Israel. And in Chicago, there was a campaign to stop that factory, to de-incentivize municipal relations with Boeing. In Chicago, and that is one example of a really powerful thing we can do. So anything that supplies military aid to other nations or to the U.S. in other nations, and also while doing work of taking the funds from the military and putting them into our own communities. It's really important to make those connections and do the political education at the same time, so people have that broader sense of international unity. We're already doing the work. I think it's just about making those connections.
Hey, Cameron, I'm with the Michigan Peace Council, and my question is, I guess let me start by saying when I was in high school, I remember hundreds of thousands of people in the streets protesting the war in Iraq. And I'm seeing today a serious crisis, not only in the anti-war movement, not only in the anti-imperialist movement, but in the peace movement more broadly. So I'm wondering, what are some, kind of like Comrade Jacobs said, what are some tactics and strategies we can begin to use that mobilizes millions, not just 1,000 people, 100 people, not even 50 people. I'm talking, how do we get millions of people, American people in the street, pointed in one direction at eventually, U.S. imperialism? How do we broaden it, and how do we mobilize millions? Thanks.
Yeah, so I think I have a two-parter to this. I think the reason why the anti-war movement is in such crisis compared to Bush is that a Democrat is in office right now, and it neutralizes half the population, the people who are most willing to be in the streets. Had it been the reverse, had Trump been elected in 2020 and the war in Ukraine still happened, nothing been different, people would be calling out Ukraine for what it is and what it's done, and would be in support of not having war, because it would be framed as Trump's war. But because it's Biden is in office, it neuters half the population, and the only people in this country who are mainstream political thinkers who are opposed to the war are Republicans who merely exist to be contrarians. And had, once again, the opposite been true, they would have supported the war because Trump would have been leading it. So I think that's a huge part of it that, feeds in a lot of it, a lot of this. Why was, the Iraq war able to get so high, anti-Iraq war sentiment able to get so high? Well, because Bush was being called out for what he was, a war criminal, a warmonger, a rich elite. Dick Cheney's wife owning stock in Apache helicopters. People were able to clearly see the lines in the sand, but they're not able to do it with Biden because he wears a blue tie. So I think in order to build an anti-war movement, we have to try to break this duopoly in people's minds that say, no, these people are on the same side. There is no fundamental difference between Trump and Biden's foreign policy. They're both aggressive warmongers that must be fought. So I think that is one of our hottest struggles that we have to work on, is politicizing people to realize that, you know, no matter if they wear a blue tie or a red tie, they're not our friends, and they must be fought. It doesn't matter who's in the White House. There's no just war anywhere.
I think that's what this event was sort of saying, that imperialism has a control over everything. The war, the economy, and culture and information. And how do we overcome that? That's what we're trying to do here, figure out how to overcome that. So we've got a lot of good ideas, and thank you. Yeah, sure. Oh, sure.
Well, I think I'm going to have to agree with Jackson, other than the fact that as much as I dislike the Donald, I have a feeling that the war probably wouldn't have happened if the Donald would have been in office. But, you know, who knows? But, you know, again, what I'm trying to do with and it's not just Ukraine, it's the whole military, is, folks, this climate change stuff, you don't screw with Mother Nature. I mean, you might be able to negotiate with Vladimir Putin and Xi, and eventually things will work out. But once we go over the edge, it's Katie bar the door, and I'm sorry I left this to young folks. As a geologist, I'm very, very worried that we're getting to the point where it's going to get really bad. It's already bad. And that's what the initiative that I'm trying to do, is getting people out on the streets. Is we can't have a war going on and expect international cooperation on climate change. I just don't see it happening. So it doesn't make it easier, but that's the issue that I'm working on. I love dealing with rocks. I don't deal well with people, so I really can't give you any advice on getting 1 million people in the street. I'm not sure what I just said will help, but I'll end it there.
Well, you're doing very well talking to people. Thank you, Jim, for doing that. We could have some rocks set up out here, though, so that you feel more comfortable. This is the last question from our young man here, and go ahead.
My name is Owen. I'm with Freedom Road Socialist organization. And my relative to my life, my activist experience is pretty recent. You know, I went to college last year as someone interested in the theory of Marx and Lenin. And I came back still very interested in that, but also an activist. And also important to note is I grew up and I live in Royal Oak, so there's some distance from Detroit there. But the question is for any and all of you is, what can somebody do to connect deeper with the city of Detroit and people of Detroit to get involved, because this is certainly a pretty important place for the movement.
These are all very important questions. Thank you to all of you who came up and added to the discussion. These are all deep questions that need much more time to talk about, but would any of our panelists like to tackle that last important one?
I don't want to hog the phone, but one of the things I did the last month with some other folks, like Laura Dewey of MILF, is I gave a book to a millionaire. I don't usually give books to millionaires, but I gave a book called The Pentagon, Climate Change and War to Sri Tandahar, our representative. And he subsequently, Laura asked, the ask in our lobby meeting, something I learned from Citizens Climate Lobby, to become a co-sponsor on the People Over Pentagon bill that is led by Barbara Lee of California and Mark Focan of Wisconsin, to become a co-signer on this bill. It's essentially to take $100 billion from the Pentagon budget per year. Rashida Tlaib is a co-signer on that bill, and lo and behold, Sri Tandahar became a co-signer, so that was easy, and worth the $30 for the book, in my opinion. But he subsequently said, okay, Jim, I think we should have a workshop on this particular issue, militarism and climate change. So now if anybody in the 1st District, or, I mean, not the 1st District, but the 13th, or in the 12th, because I'm going to try and get Rashida Tlaib involved in this, is to have a workshop with a representative to discuss this particular issue, and I'm looking for folks to again, some of the things that I present in this poster is to show the Detroit community how militarism is affecting their lives, taking resources away from them, adding emissions and things like that. So if you get a query on that particular event, please think about it, please support it, and come out for it.
All right, we're right on schedule. This is perfect. Thank you so much. I'm very optimistic, to be honest. I don't want to leave this room here feeling disappointed about the struggle, because yes, the anti-war movement is nothing like it used to be. But it'll come back, and eventually, thanks to the rest of the help from the rest of the world. I mean, you all know about and reading about fantastic events taking place around the world. China just brokered negotiations between Iran and Saudi Arabia, changed the whole Middle East. That was the reason for the Yemen war. The Yemen people now are finally free. Things are changing. Israel has had to relocate their military. Lots of stuff has changed. The forces are changing against the unipolar world that we've been living in. A multipolar world is developing. And if you're not reading about all the exciting things that are happening with China and Brazil and Cuba and Russia and India, and they're all linking up to de-dollarize and create a multipolar world. I want to thank all the guests who've joined us today. Let's give a nice round of applause once again to Madeline, Sandy, Jackson, Meryam, and Jim. This whole series I'd like to dedicate to my wife, Twyla Meyer, who started this thing with me. And she started my struggle for peace and justice back when we toured to Cuba back in 1980. And we came back as dedicated revolutionaries who didn't divert from that path till now. We won't till the end. Cuba is a wonderful experience. That's why I hope you all get a chance to experience that. I want to say that this video will be available on YouTube, on our channel, Michigan Peace Council. I want to also honor our fallen hero, Pat Fry, who was also a tremendous activist here in Detroit. We miss her. And we'll let you know about the memorial terms or the funeral arrangements. So I think we can conclude with that. And thank everybody. There's still some food left. I don't know if there's food left in the other room. But please, if you haven't seen the posters we put up on the wall that relate to all the facts that we've been talking about here, lots of facts on the wall. And if you have ideas from your group, if your group hasn't been represented here, or if you have more to say about this, I wish we had a forum online. We haven't organized that, but it would be nice for Peace Council to have interchange online somehow. We really thank you so much for being panelists here. This has been another great experience with an audience that we all love and support too. So let's all work together for peace and justice in the world against the dreaded U.S. imperialism, which is causing a lot of the problems we're fighting against. Thank you. Good day.